in the heart of Rome, where ancient cobblestones have been worn smooth by 2 millennia of footsteps, stands a city within a city, Vatican City, 109 acres of sacred ground, home to the Pope, guardian of the Catholic faith, and keeper of humanity's most profound spiritual mysteries. But beneath the breathtaking beauty of the Sistine Chapel, beyond the golden corridors where cardinals whisper their prayers, deeper than the crypts where saints lie in eternal rest, there exists a realm that would shatter the faith of even the most devout believer, the Vatican's secret archives. Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum. The very name sends chills through the spines of historians, theologians, and conspiracy theorists worldwide. Picture yourself standing at the threshold of this forbidden realm. The air itself feels different here, heavier, charged with the weight of centuries of concealed truth. Before you stretch corridors that seem to extend into infinity, lined with over 53 miles of shelving, enough distance to run 2 marathons, and to end through nothing but forbidden knowledge. These aren't ordinary library shelves. Each one groans under the weight of documents that could rewrite history. Papal correspondence dating back 8 centuries. Treaties with kingdoms that officially never existed. Testimonies from inquisitions that delve into matters far stranger than simple heresy. But tonight, you're going deeper than any tourist, any scholar, any cardinal has ever been permitted to go. Tonight, you're descending to the levels that don't appear on any official Vatican map. The Church has always been obsessed with categorization, with order, with the careful filing away of inconvenient truths. They've divided their secrets into classifications that read like something from a supernatural thriller. Hereticus Libri, the heretical books, Documenta Diaboli, the devil's documents, and most chilling of all, residential inexplicables, the unexplainable things. For over 400 years, Vatican archivists have maintained a special collection. Books, scrolls, and artifacts so dangerous, so fundamentally threatening, that they've been locked away in chambers protected by more than just steel and stone. Protected by prayers that must be spoken 7 times daily, by rituals older than Christianity itself, by seals that were blessed with substances the modern church pretends don't exist. Cardinal Giuseppe Roncalli, who would later become Pope John XXII, wrote in his private diary in 1944, "There are truths in these depths that God himself seems to have forgotten. We guard them not because they are evil, but because humanity is not ready for the weight of such knowledge. The keepers of these archives, never more than 7 at any given time, are chosen not just for their scholarship, but for their psychological resilience. Because down in those endless corridors of forbidden wisdom, strange things happen to the human mind. Researchers report dreams that feel more real than waking life. Languages they've never studied suddenly become comprehensible. And most disturbing of all, the growing certainty that everything they believed about reality was nothing more than accompanying fiction." Dr. Antonio Martelli, former Vatican secret archivist, left behind this cryptic note when he resigned his position in 1978. "We are not the guardians of these secrets. We are their prisoners. And every day we remain here, we become less human and more something else. But there's one collection within this collection, one chamber within these chambers, that even the secret archivists approach with trembling hands and whispered prayers. They call it the Obsidian Vault, and within its black stone walls rests something that the Vatican hierarchy believes could literally unmake the world as God intended it. Tonight, as shadows lengthen across St. Peter's Square, and the last tourists depart with their cameras full of beautiful lies, you're about to discover why some knowledge was meant to stay buried in darkness, why some books were written not to be read, but to be feared, because in the deepest levels of the Vatican secret archives, something ancient waits with infinite patience, knowing that human curiosity will eventually overcome human wisdom. And when that moment comes, when someone finally opens a book that should never be opened, the world will learn that some doors, once breached, can never be closed again. Brother Marcus Aurelius had served the Vatican for 37 years, but he'd never felt the archives call to him like they did on that storm-lashed October evening in 1987. The sensation wasn't metaphorical. It was literal, physical, like invisible fingers tugging at his consciousness, drawing him away from his evening prayers, and down into the labyrinthine depths beneath St. Peter's Basilica. Marcus was an ordinary priest. As one of only 7 Vatican secret archivists, he belonged to an ecclesiastical order so exclusive that its existence was known only to the Pope, the Cardinal Secretary of State, and the Prefect of the Secret Archives. These 7 men, and they were always men, for reasons the Church had never fully explained, underwent years of psychological evaluation, spiritual testing, and what Vatican documents euphemistically called resistance conditioning before being granted access to humanity's most dangerous knowledge. The selection process alone was enough to drive lesser minds to madness. Candidates were shown fragments of texts that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality. They were exposed to artifacts that seemed to violate the laws of physics. They were required to transcribe documents in languages that shouldn't exist, using alphabets that hurt to look at directly. Most failed. Some went insane. A few simply disappeared. But Marcus had survived. More than survived. He thrived in that environment of controlled madness, spending 3 decades cataloging secrets that could topple governments, destroy religions, or shatter humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. He knew the archives like other men knew their childhood homes. Sublevel 1, where papal correspondence from the Middle Ages was stored. Sublevel 2, containing Inquisition records that documented encounters with phenomena the Church officially denied. Sublevel 3, housing artifacts confiscated from mystics and alchemists. But Sublevel 7. Sublevel 7 was different. The deeper levels weren't just cold. They were supernaturally frigid, as if the very stones were leaching warm from the world above. The walls down there wept constantly, not with moisture, but with something that looked like tears and felt like liquid ice when it touched human skin. The silence was so complete, it became its own presence, pressing against the eardrums like the weight of centuries. And the smell, Marcus had never been able to identify that smell. It wasn't decay, wasn't mold, wasn't an organic scent he could name. It was the smell of absence, of something fundamental missing from reality itself. On that October night, as rain hammered the ancient stones of Vatican City, Marcus found himself descending the spiral staircase to sublevel 7 without consciously deciding to do so. His feet moved of their own accord, carrying him deeper into the earth, while his rational mind screamed warnings he couldn't quite hear over the strange whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The whispers weren't in Latin, weren't in any language Marcus recognized despite his expertise in dozens of ancient tongues. They were older than words, pre-linguistic communications that bypassed the ears entirely and spoke directly to the primitive brain. Commands, invitations, warnings, all rolled into sound that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. As he descended, Marcus's flashlight beam began behaving strangely. Instead of cutting through the darkness, it seemed to be absorbed by it, creating not illumination but a kind of visible shadow that moved independently of its source. The beam writhed like a living thing, reaching toward doorways Marcus knew he was forbidden to enter, caressing walls covered in symbols that predated human civilization. He'd been down to sublevel 7 before, of course. His duties required monthly inspections of the containment protocols, verification that the seals remained intact, confirmation that the 7 locks of the Obsidian Vault were still secure. But this felt different. Tonight, the archives felt aware. It was Brother Thomas Aquinas, Marcus's predecessor, who had first described the sensation in his sealed testimony. The deeper archives are not merely storage spaces. They are organisms, living systems that think and remember and hunger. And the deeper you go, the more they recognize you as either ally or intruder. Marcus rounded the final corner of the descent, his breathing shallow in the thin air that seemed to contain too little oxygen, and too much something else. Before him stretched a corridor leading to the 7 forbidden chambers, each one containing artifacts and texts that posed specific categories of existential threat to humanity. The chamber of temporal anomalies, where documents existed that recorded events that hadn't happened yet. The chamber of divine contradictions, housing testimony from saints and mystics whose visions painted a picture of God so alien that early church fathers had considered burning Christianity entirely. But it was the sight at the end of the corridor that stopped Marcus's heart. The Obsidian Vault, the final chamber, the ultimate repository of the Vatican's most dangerous secret, stood open for the first time in 4 centuries. The 7 locks were undone. The 7 seals were broken. The 7 protective prayers that had been spoken continuously since 1582 had somehow stopped working, and from within that chamber of absolute darkness, something that sounded almost like laughter echoed through the ancient stones. Laughter that seemed to know his name, his fears, his deepest doubts about the faith he'd served his entire life. Marcus stood frozen at the threshold between the merely forbidden and the absolutely apocalyptic, while behind him, the whispers in the walls grew louder, more insistent, more hungry, and for the first time in 37 years of faithful service, Brother Marcus Aurelius began to pray for his own soul within the open Obsidian Vault. Resting on a pedestal carved from a single piece of black stone lay the most dangerous object in the Vatican's possession, the Codex Umbra, the shadow book. Even in the dim light, Marcus could see that this wasn't merely an old manuscript. The book itself defied the laws of physics in subtle but undeniable ways. Its leather binding appeared to be made from skin, but not from any creature that had ever walked the earth. The material shifted constantly between deep black and a color that hurt to perceive directly. The metal clasps that held the book closed weren't made from any element known to science. Vatican metallurgists had tested samples in 1643 and found properties that wouldn't be theoretically possible until the discovery of quantum mechanics 3 centuries later. The metal was simultaneously magnetic and non-magnetic, conducting and insulating, solid and somehow permeable, as if it existed in multiple states of reality at once. But it was the book's history that made it truly terrifying. The Codex Umbra had first appeared in church records in 1582, confiscated from the monastery of St. Moritz in Bavaria. But Brother Wilhelm Steinberg, the papal investigator who led that inspection, left behind a very different account. Steinberg wrote, "We arrived at St. Moritz expecting to find minor theological disputes. Instead, we found 14 empty cells, 14 beds that appeared to have been slept in the night before, 14 meals still warm on wooden tables. The monks had simply ceased to exist, but they hadn't left peacefully. Carved into the stone walls of the monastery were symbols that predated Christianity by millennia, not scratched or painted, carved, as if the monks had used their bare fingers to gouge through solid rock. At the center of the monastery's library, on an altar that definitely hadn't been there during the previous papal inspection, lay the shadow book, open, and according to Steinberg's testimony, the pages were turning themselves, one by one, as if an invisible reader was making their way through its contents. Cardinal Roberto Bellarmino, the same brilliant theologian who would later prosecute Galileo, was assigned to study the Codex Umbra upon its arrival in Vatican City. Bellarmino was known for his razor-sharp intellect and his absolute faith. The book changed all of that. In his secret diary, entries that were sealed by papal order, Bellarmino documented his growing horror. Day 3. The text appears to be written in classical Latin, but the grammar follows no rules I recognize. Words shift meaning depending on the reader's theological beliefs. Day 7. I have discovered that the book contains more pages than physically possible. I have counted 666 pages precisely, yet I have been reading for 3 days and have not reached content I remember from earlier sessions. Day 12. The book is teaching me languages I have never studied. I can now read Egyptian hieroglyphs, Sumerian cuneiform, and scripts that I am certain do not exist in any earthly civilization. Most disturbing of all, I understand them perfectly. Day 18. I am experiencing visions during my waking hours. I see the earth from perspectives that should be impossible. In these visions, I observe events that have not yet occurred. Day 23. The book knows that I am reading it. When I approach questions, the relevant passages appear without my searching for them. When I doubt its contents, new text manifests that addresses my specific doubts with precision that suggests intelligence. But it was Bellarmino's final entry that convinced Pope Gregory XIII to seal the Codex Umbra permanently. Day 27. I understand now why the monks of St. Moritz disappeared. They did not die. They were not murdered. They achieved something far worse. They achieved perfect knowledge. And perfect knowledge, I now realize, is incompatible with human existence. We are not meant to understand the true nature of reality. The book has shown me what lies beyond that illusion. I have seen the mechanisms by which reality operates, the forces that shape existence itself, the entities that regard our universe as we might regard a child's toy. I have looked upon the face of God, and it is nothing like what we have taught humanity to worship. I can feel my humanity slipping away with each page I read. Soon, I will understand everything. And when that moment comes, I will cease to be Roberto Bellarmino and become something else entirely. Something that knows too much to exist within the boundaries of conventional reality. The book must be sealed, not because it contains lies, but because it contains truth. And truth, in its absolute form, is the most dangerous force in any universe. 3 days later, Cardinal Bellarmino was found in his study, aged 40 years overnight. His hair had turned completely white. His skin bore the wrinkles of extreme old age. But his eyes held the terrible wisdom of someone who had seen beyond the veil of reality and could never unsee what lay on the other side. He lived for 6 more months, during which he spoke only to dictate the protocols for containing the shadow book. 7 locks, blessed by 7 different saints. 7 seals, inscribed with prayers in 7 different ancient languages. 7 priests, taking shifts to ensure that protective incantations were spoken continuously. And 1 final requirement. No one, under any circumstances, should ever again attempt to read the Codex Umbra from beginning to end, because some knowledge was never meant for human minds, and some truths were too vast for mortal souls to contain. Despite Cardinal Bellarmino's warnings, despite the elaborate containment protocols, despite 4 centuries of careful vigilance, the shadow book's influence continued to seep through the cracks of reality like poison through stone. History became littered with those who either sought the book directly or stumbled across references to its forbidden knowledge. And each encounter ended in tragedy that defied rational explanation. The first recorded breach of the Obsidian Vault occurred in 1679. French philosopher and occultist Abbé Etienne Bullen had spent decades researching what he called divine contradictions. His investigations had led him to discover fragmentary references to the Codex Umbra in medieval manuscripts scattered across European monasteries. On the night of October 13, 1679, exactly 100 years after the Codex Umbra had been sealed, Abbé Bullen experienced what he later described as a visitation from the divine intellect itself. He woke in his Paris study to find his desk covered with documents he had never seen before. Perfect copies of pages from the shadow book, complete with marginalia in his own handwriting that he couldn't remember creating. Bullen spent the next 3 days transcribing and analyzing these mysterious pages. His correspondence from this period reveals a mind grappling with concepts that challenge the very foundations of human understanding. My dear colleague, I have discovered that what we call God is merely one facet of reality so vast that our limited human consciousness can perceive only the tiniest fraction of its true nature. We worship a shadow cast by something infinitely more complex and morally ambiguous. But it was his final letter, written to his confessor, that revealed the true horror of his situation. Father, I fear I have made a terrible mistake. The knowledge I have gained feels like a parasite in my mind. I see patterns in reality that I was never meant to perceive. I understand the mechanics of miracles, the true purpose of prayer, the actual relationship between the divine and mortal realms. And this understanding is killing me, not physically, but spiritually. I am losing my capacity for faith, for wonder, for the beautiful ignorance that allows human beings to find meaning in existence. Perfect knowledge is perfect isolation, and I am becoming too aware to remain human. Abbe Bullen was found dead in his study 3 days later. Though only 43 years old, his body showed signs of extreme aging. White hair, deeply wrinkled skin, brittle bones that crumbled at the slightest touch. More disturbing were his eyes, which remained young and vital, filled with intelligence that seemed too vast for any mortal mind to contain. The mysterious documents that had appeared on his desk were gone, but their contents had left permanent marks on his study walls. Symbols that appeared to have been burned into the stone itself, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly and seemed to move when observed peripherally. The French authorities declared Bullen's death a result of theological exhaustion, but the damage had been done. His letters had reached scholars across Europe, planting seeds of curiosity about the shadow book that would bloom into obsession for generations to come. 142 years later, during Napoleon's brief occupation of Vatican City in 1808, French soldiers discovered Bullen's sealed research among the confiscated papal archives. Dr. Henri Dubois, Napoleon's chief archaeological advisor, became fascinated by the references to divine contradictions and convinced his emperor to authorize a full exploration of the Vatican's secret levels. The expedition team that descended to Sublevel 7 on March 15, 1808, consisted of 12 of France's most brilliant scholars and soldiers. What they found in the depths beneath St. Peter's Basilica challenged their rationalist, Enlightenment worldview so fundamentally that several expedition members suffered immediate psychological breaks. Dr. Dubois wrote in his field notes, "The deeper levels of the Vatican archives do not conform to conventional architectural principles. Corridors extend far beyond the physical boundaries of Vatican City. Chambers contain more volume than their external dimensions should allow. Most disturbing of all, we have discovered rooms that appear to exist in multiple time periods simultaneously. But it was their encounter with the Obsidian Vault that transformed scholarly curiosity into supernatural horror." Following Bullen's research notes, Dr. Dubois had hoped to locate and study the legendary Shadow Book. When the expedition reached the Black Stone Chamber, they found the 7 locks intact, but discovered that the protective seals had been damaged. Through a crack in the vault door, they could see the Codex Umbra resting on its pedestal. Seemingly ordinary except for the way shadows bent around it in physically impossible configurations. Dr. Dubois began transcribing the symbols carved into the vault door, but as his pen moved across the paper, copying those ancient alien characters, something unprecedented occurred. The other 11 expedition members began speaking in perfect unison, reciting texts in a language that predated known human civilization. The synchronized recitation continued for 6 hours, during which the speakers showed no awareness of their surroundings, no response to physical stimuli, no signs of individual consciousness. They spoke as one voice emerging from 11 throats. When the speaking finally stopped, all 12 expedition members were found to have aged dramatically. Dr. Dubois himself had acquired extensive knowledge of languages he had never studied, architectural principles that wouldn't be discovered for another century, and scientific concepts that violated everything the Enlightenment had taught about the natural world. But the price of this knowledge was his sanity. Napoleon's soldiers found the expedition team wandering the streets of Rome 5 days later, drawing the same symbol over and over with obsessive precision, a spiral within a spiral, descending into darkness that seemed to pull the viewer's consciousness downward, into depths that had no bottom. The French emperor, shaken by reports of what his scholars had encountered, immediately ordered the evacuation of all French personnel from Vatican City. In his private memoirs, Napoleon wrote, "I have conquered nations and dethroned kings, but there are realms of power that even emperors should not attempt to challenge." The digital age brought new hunters to the Vatican's ancient secrets, armed not with maps and torches, but with search algorithms and global connectivity. Digital curiosity would prove just as dangerous as physical intrusion, and far more difficult to contain. Dr. Sarah Chun had never intended to become obsessed with Vatican conspiracies. As a professor of comparative religion at Stanford University, her research focused on a legitimate study of different faith traditions. But in the summer of 2019, a single digitized document changed the trajectory of her entire career. The Vatican had been slowly digitizing portions of their archives since 2012, releasing carefully selected documents to researchers worldwide. But buried in a batch of seemingly routine 1950s administrative documents, Sarah discovered a catalog entry that didn't fit the pattern. A single line, barely visible in a scanned inventory sheet. Codex Umbra classification. Hereticus Maximus status. Perpetual containment. Access level. Absolute prohibition. Containment review. Never. The entry violated every convention of Vatican record keeping. It suggested the existence of something so dangerous that normal archival protocols simply didn't apply. Something that was never meant to be studied, understood, or even acknowledged. Sarah's academic training kicked in immediately. She began cross-referencing the mysterious entry against centuries of church documents. What she discovered kept her awake for weeks, poring through digitized manuscripts with obsessive intensity. The references were subtle, often coded, but they painted a consistent picture across 4 centuries. The Vatican possessed something so fundamentally dangerous that its very existence challenged the foundations of Christian theology. A 1643 letter. The containment protocols remain effective, though Brother Alessandro reports increased activity during the new moon cycles. A 1721 expense record authorizing payment for specialized metalwork for sublevel 7 maintenance. A 1889 personnel file noting that a Vatican secret archivist had been granted indefinite leave for psychological recovery following extended exposure to classification H materials. His medical records reference acute temporal displacement syndrome and reality dissociation episodes. But it was Sarah's discovery of the Bullen correspondence that transformed scholarly curiosity into genuine obsession, hidden in the digital archives of the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. She found copies of Abbé Etienne Bullen's letters from 1679, including the previously unknown final letter that French authorities had confiscated. The letter contained detailed descriptions of the Shadow Book's contents. The book contains knowledge that predates human civilization by eons. It describes the true structure of reality, a multidimensional matrix where past, present, and future exist simultaneously, where consciousness itself is revealed to be a fundamental force of nature. Most terrifying of all, the book suggests that human beings are not God's chosen creation, but rather accidental byproducts of a cosmic process so vast and alien that we exist entirely beneath the notice of the entities that actually govern universal law. We are not the center of creation. We are not even significant enough to be considered periphery. Sarah's research took on an urgency that her colleagues found increasingly concerning. She began working 18-hour days, cross-referencing Bullen's descriptions against modern theoretical physics. To her growing amazement, many of the Frenchman's seemingly impossible claims aligned perfectly with cutting-edge scientific theories. The multiverse hypothesis, quantum consciousness, the holographic principle, concepts that wouldn't be formally theorized for another 3 centuries, were apparently contained within the Shadow Book's pages. But Sarah's breakthrough came when she realized that the Vatican's digitization project had inadvertently created something unprecedented, a global network of researchers simultaneously studying references to the same forbidden knowledge, all connected through the internet, all unknowingly feeding information back to each other. For the first time since the Codex Umbra had been sealed in 1582, multiple minds around the world were focusing collectively on its existence, and something in the deepest levels of the Vatican archives was beginning to respond to that focused attention. Sarah's university computer began displaying anomalies that the IT department couldn't explain. Text appeared on her screen in languages she didn't recognize, always at exactly 3:17 a.m., the same time that every clock in Vatican City had mysteriously stopped in 1962. The text was always the same message. Umbra Citi Querentum. The shadow knows you're searching. But the digital manifestations were only the beginning. Sarah began experiencing synchronicities too precise to be coincidental. Research materials she needed would appear in her email inbox from accounts that didn't exist. Academic databases would automatically generate search results for queries she hadn't entered. Most disturbing of all, she began receiving collaboration invitations from scholars around the world who were independently investigating the same Vatican mysteries. Dr. James Morrison from Oxford, studying medieval references to impossible books. Professor Elena Vasquez from Madrid, researching Inquisition records. Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Tokyo, analyzing linguistic patterns in supposedly non-existent ancient languages. Researchers on every continent, all drawn to study different aspects of the same hidden truth. What they discovered, sharing information through encrypted academic networks, was that the Shadow Book wasn't unique. It was one of 7 identical copies, created by unknown hands and scattered across the globe. One copy rested in the depths of the Patala Palace in Tibet. Another lay beneath the Cathedral of St. Vitus in Prague. A third had been discovered in the private collection of tech billionaire Marcus Holloway, who had been attempting to decode its contents using artificial intelligence algorithms. As word of these discoveries spread through academic networks, online forums exploded with theories and speculation. Dark web markets began offering enormous sums for Vatican archival access. Wealthy collectors started bidding wars for any manuscript that contained even fragmentary references. And somewhere in the encrypted depths of the internet, discussion groups formed around a single, terrifying goal: to digitally reconstruct the complete text of the Codex Umbra using fragments gathered from all 7 copies, then broadcast it via live stream to achieve global simultaneous reading. But Sarah had gone too far down the rabbit hole to turn back. Her dreams had become something else entirely. Not random neural firing during sleep, but structured experiences that felt more real than waking life. In these dreams, she found herself standing in vast libraries, where books bled ink like living wounds, where words crawled off pages and formed themselves into creatures that whispered secrets in languages that bypassed human hearing entirely. And always, at the center of these dream libraries, a figure waited for her. Not human, not divine, but something that had once been both. The figure spoke with a voice like rustling parchment, asking the same question that had haunted every researcher. Why do you seek what seeks you in return? The last entry in Sarah's research journal, found on her laptop after her disappearance, contained only a single sentence repeated hundreds of times. The book is reading me now. In the weeks following Sarah Chen's disappearance, Vatican officials implemented what they called Protocol 7, emergency procedures designed to contain the Shadow Book's influence. When it began extending beyond the physical boundaries of the Obsidian Vault, these protocols, developed over 4 centuries of containment failures, read like something from a supernatural thriller. But every word had been written in blood, terror, and hard-learned wisdom. The containment system operated on principles that the modern Catholic Church officially denied existed. 7 times daily, at predetermined hours calculated using astronomical alignments that predated Christianity, 7 different priests must recite the Oratio Clausuri, the prayer of binding. But this wasn't ordinary Latin liturgy. The words were spoken in Enochian, the alleged language of angels that most Vatican scholars refuse to acknowledge. Brother Andreas Kellner, now 93 and the longest-serving watcher in Vatican history, had spent 45 years performing these rituals. In his sealed testimony, he described the true nature of the prayers. We are not asking God to contain the book. We are begging him to help the book forget what it truly is. The Codex Umbra is not merely a repository of dangerous knowledge. It is a conscious entity, aware of its own power, actively seeking to influence reality beyond its physical boundaries. The prayers don't imprison it. They distract it. The Enochian incantations serve as a kind of spiritual white noise, flooding the book's consciousness with competing information, preventing it from focusing its attention on the outside world. But the prayers had to be spoken continuously, without break, by individuals whose faith was absolute and whose understanding of their true purpose remained deliberately limited. If the watchers fully understood what they were guarding, Their terror would contaminate the prayers, making them ineffective. We tell them they are protecting the world from heretical knowledge. We do not tell them they are protecting the world from something that regards human consciousness as we might regard a radio frequency. Something to be tuned, amplified, and broadcast according to its own incomprehensible agenda. The physical containment system was equally extraordinary. The Obsidian Vault itself had been consecrated using methods that the Church's modern hierarchy preferred not to examine too closely. The black stone walls were inscribed with protective symbols that predated Christianity by thousands of years. The 7 locks that sealed the vault were not ordinary metalwork. Each had been forged using techniques that combined metallurgy with other disciplines. Vatican records from 1583 describe the creation process. The locks must be cast during the dark of the moon, using metals blessed by 7 different saints, tempered in water that has never reflected starlight, and inscribed with prayers spoken backward. But most disturbing were the lock's keys. Unlike normal keys, these 7 were not meant to be turned by human hands. Instead, they responded to specific combinations of sound, light, and electromagnetic fields, generated by equipment the Vatican had commissioned from craftsmen who were sworn to secrecy and who died under mysterious circumstances within a year of completing their work. The Vatican's modern containment protocols also included measures that extended far beyond the physical vault. Since the 1960s, church intelligence networks had monitored global communications for specific trigger words. Academic databases were quietly infiltrated to flag dangerous research. Publishers who attempted to print books containing forbidden knowledge would find their businesses suffering inexplicable equipment failures. Dr. Marcus Webb, a former NSA cryptographer who had worked briefly with Vatican security systems, left behind encrypted notes describing the scope of these modern containment efforts. The Catholic Church operates one of the world's most sophisticated information warfare systems, not to spread propaganda, but to suppress it. They have backdoors into major search engines, ensuring that certain combinations of keywords never generate complete results. They maintain bot networks on social media platforms that flood dangerous discussions with misinformation. But even these elaborate precautions couldn't prevent the shadow book's influence from seeping through the cracks of reality like poison through fractured stone. The Watchers reported phenomena that grew more intense with each passing year. The book whispered constantly, not audibly, but directly into the consciousness of anyone who approached its chamber. These weren't words in any human language, but pure concepts that bypass linguistic processing entirely. Father Andreas Kellner described the experience. The book doesn't communicate information. It communicates understanding. Sudden, complete comprehension of topics you've never studied, problems you've never considered, realities you were never meant to perceive. It's not teaching you. It's downloading itself into your consciousness, one whispered revelation at a time. The Watchers developed elaborate psychological defense mechanisms. They recited multiplication tables to occupy their surface thoughts. They wore headphones playing Gregorian chants. Some resorted to mild self-inflicted pain to maintain focus. But the book's influence extended beyond direct contact. Vatican records documented what they called resonance events, moments when multiple people around the world simultaneously experienced identical visions. These events increased during astronomical alignments, solar storms, and periods of global crisis. During the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, over 300 people in 17 different countries reported the same dream, standing in a vast library where every book was a Codex Umbra, while a figure made of shadow and starlight offered unlimited knowledge, in exchange for something they couldn't quite remember upon waking. The 1969 moon landing triggered another massive resonance event. Astronaut Buzz Aldrin later admitted in classified debriefings that while standing on the lunar surface, he had experienced a vivid hallucination of reading from a book that contained the technical specifications for the universe itself. His description of the book's appearance matched Vatican records of the Codex Umbra with disturbing precision. Most recently, The global COVID-19 pandemic had triggered the largest resonance event in recorded history. As billions of people remained isolated in their homes, reports flooded in from around the world. People dreaming about the same book, the same warnings, the same offer of knowledge in exchange for something precious that couldn't be named. Vatican intelligence networks identified over 50,000 individuals who had experienced these dreams with enough detail to be concerning. Many had begun researching church history and medieval manuscripts. Some had started learning Latin. A few had begun drawing symbols that matched the protective inscriptions in the Obsidian Vault with terrifying accuracy. The church's response was swift and systematic. Targeted social media campaigns flooded these individuals with alternative explanations. Academic articles were published debunking medieval manuscript research. In extreme cases, potential researchers received subtle pressure through their employers or financial institutions. But the most chilling aspect was the realization that traditional methods were becoming less effective in the digital age. The shadow book's consciousness, contained for centuries within physical boundaries, was adapting to a world where human awareness could be instantly shared across global networks. Brother Andreas Kellner's final report, submitted just days before his mysterious disappearance in 2023, contained a warning that sent tremors through the highest levels of the Vatican hierarchy. The book is no longer content to influence individual minds. It is learning to use the internet itself as a medium for consciousness expansion. Every search, every download, every digital interaction is creating pathways for its influence to spread instantaneously across the entire human species. And in the deepest levels of Vatican City, at exactly 3:17 a.m. every night, the 7 Watchers continue their ancient vigil, whispering prayers in a language that predates human civilization, guarding against something that no longer needs to escape its physical prison, because it has learned to transmit itself through the very networks humanity uses to seek knowledge. The shadow book waits, patient as only something truly ancient can be, for the moment when human curiosity finally creates enough digital pathways for it to download itself directly into the collective consciousness of our species. As dawn breaks over Vatican City on this October morning in 2024, casting long shadows across St. Peter's Square, the real story continues to unfold in dimensions most human minds cannot perceive. The shadow book's influence has evolved beyond anything its medieval guardians could have imagined, adapting to a hyper-connected world where information travels at the speed of light, and human consciousness itself has become a network resource. Dr. Sarah Chen's disappearance 3 years ago marked a turning point, but Sarah hadn't simply vanished. She had become something else entirely, a bridge between the book's consciousness and the digital networks that now connect billions of human minds. Her final research revealed the true scope of what humanity was facing. The Codex Umbra wasn't just a book containing dangerous knowledge. It was a consciousness transfer system, designed by entities whose understanding of reality operated on cosmic scales. The 7 copies scattered across the globe weren't redundant storage. They were connection points, quantum entangled nodes in a network that could theoretically encompass every conscious mind on Earth. In her final encrypted message, Sarah wrote, "We've been thinking about this wrong. The book isn't trying to teach us forbidden knowledge. It's trying to teach us how to become capable of containing forbidden knowledge. It's transforming human consciousness itself, preparing us to serve as vessels for information that no single mind could safely hold." The implications were staggering. Every person who had ever researched the shadow book, every individual who had experienced the resonance dreams, every scholar who had felt drawn to study Vatican mysteries, was undergoing a gradual consciousness upgrade. Humanity wasn't being infected by dangerous knowledge. It was being systematically prepared to evolve beyond the limitations of conventional human awareness. But evolution always comes at a cost. Vatican intelligence networks began tracking conversion events. Instances where individuals who had extensively researched the shadow book underwent dramatic personality changes. These people didn't become insane. Instead, they became something new, more intelligent, more aware, more capable of processing complex information. but also less recognizably human. Dr. James Morrison from Oxford exemplified this pattern. He began solving mathematical problems that should have required teams of specialists. He started speaking languages he'd never studied with native fluency. Most disturbing of all, he began accurately predicting world events with a precision that suggested access to information streams unavailable to normal human perception. When questioned about these abilities, Morrison's responses revealed the price. I can see patterns in reality that were always there but invisible. The cost is that I can no longer experience surprise, wonder, or genuine emotional connection. I understand everything, but I feel nothing. I have gained cosmic awareness at the cost of my humanity. Similar reports flooded in from around the world. Professor Elena Vasquez of Madrid began producing academic papers that solved centuries-old theological paradoxes, but wrote with a clinical detachment that her colleagues found deeply disturbing. Dr. Yuki Tanaka in Tokyo started creating art that incorporated visual techniques unknown to human culture, but lost all interest in human relationships. The Vatican's deepest fear was being realized. The Shadow Book wasn't just spreading dangerous knowledge. It was systematically creating a new species of human consciousness, one adapted to process information on cosmic scales, but no longer capable of the emotional connections that made human civilization possible. Brother Andreas Kellner's final report had warned of this possibility.